that you've read and about which you ask questions. So now we move to questions. First question, I want to look at concern the relationship between information transfer and communication.
Dan, possibly
Yeah.
we should ask if anyone had clarification.
Oh yes, that's indeed. That's a very good point. Does anybody have clarification questions on the 5 points I've mentioned so far? I'll take the silence to be an ostensive way of saying no. Okay. So first, range of issues about information transfer versus communication. And here, as you know, I use blue for where I'm quoting the article and black for from now on for the question that some of you have been asking. So communication, we wrote, as we will use the term, and of course, communication is a term that has been and can be used in a variety of terms that we don't think that there is one right way to use it. Communication, as we will use the term, differs from other forms of information transfer for its reliance on a pair of mutually adjusted complementary capacities in senders and receivers of information, as pointed out by a number of people, including Tom Scott Philip and Christopher Heinz from our group here. Senders have a capacity to provide information by producing appropriate stimuli that the receiver can perceive, for instance, honeybee scent marking territory, or linguistic utterances. And the receiver have a cognitive capacity to process this stimuli and thus acquire the information communicated. And this, so the notion of mutual adjustment and is realized, say, when you talk about evolutionary evolved form of communication by a co-evolution of the capacities of senders and receivers of information. It can be also just we make a convention that we'll use certain signals to communicate one thing and another to communicate. And then again, we have mutually adjusted capacities. Mutual adjustment is crucial to make the difference between mere information transfer and communication. And now we come to points that some of you have raised about that. So Charles wrote, again, part of a much longer presentation of the differences between his views and ours. All information transfer is by definition a form of communication, so there are by definition no other forms of information transfer. Well, if it's by definition, it's a stipulation, it may be useful to his purpose to define communication in this way. We think it's relevant and to, in fact, distinguish them, and we're not original in that. Again, a number of people have done that before. And Scott Phillips has been influential, in fact, in developing the basic idea on which we rely. So, to illustrate very briefly why we prefer a definition that makes the difference relevant. First, when someone, like I'm doing now, speaks English with a foreign accent, this gives the audience the information that the speaker is not a native English speaker. I'm not communicating that, but I'm informing you of that by speaking with a foreign accent. So there's information transfer without communication. Again, you might think it's not a good use of the word communication or transfer, but that's how it's a fairly standard use, and that's how we define it. To give another example, so this was an example of non-intentional informational transfer, which is not communicative. Another example is the fairly common practice of letting the lights on in your house or in your flat, either when you're out or when you are just to know possible burglars, or let them think that you're at home. So either to inform them or misinform them that you're at home. You're not communicating to them in doing so. But you are definitely informing them, transferring information to them, again, or misinformation. So with this kind of background, we move to Robin's question. So she wrote, you say, an informative intention is not itself an intention to communicate, let alone to communicate ostensibly. that is, it is not ostensibly that it is not ostensibly communicative is clear, but I'm less clear that it doesn't fall within the very general characterization of communication. And the point here is the point that the capacities which make the transfer of information effective have to be mutually adjusted in the communicator and the audience. So when the burglars see the lights on and infer that, as one hopes, that the homeowners, that there are people in the house, what they use is just general, not knowledge to coordinate with a communicator, but just general knowledge about people's behavior and their use of lights in the house, and that's how actually it works. Similarly, if you attribute to me the property of not being a native English speaker, you use your general capacity to recognize evidence of linguistic origin, not something that's adapted to somebody trying to inform you of the fact that they're not a native English speaker. So it's a question of a mutual adjustment, which again can come through evolution or through convention or possible other ways. That's what makes the difference. I hope that answers the question, and which leads me to, by the way, Charles, Robin, and now soon Agnieszka, if you want to intervene in the dispute or add to your question, dispute my answer, add to question, please do. So Agnieszka makes the following point. Please elaborate on the difference between the processing of basic ostension and the processing of direct observational evidence by the hearer interpreter. And she gives a nice example. Taking the example of a boy looking for his tablet when his mother is pointing towards it, he's got observational evidence of information she wants to communicate to him. He gets that information just by following the point and seeing his tablet on the sofa. If she's not communicating with him, imagine they're not speaking to another relationship are called between the two at that moment. But when he says aloud, oh, where's my tablet? Where's my tablet? And if she doesn't answer, but nevertheless can't help herself from directing her gaze towards the tablet, so me reflects on her part. When she hears the word tablet, he also gets observational evidence of the whereabouts of the tablet. He gets it if he follows her gaze, which is something that people do quite spontaneously, and not just people, lots of other animals too. So how are these two cases presented by the boy? So first, clearly the second one is not a case of communication. There's a transfer of information that you often get indeed from following other people's gaze, and now suddenly you get informed. And in some, if the following of the gaze is introduced by establishing eye contact, then it becomes ostensive behavior. So if the mother looks at the child in the eyes and then turns her head towards the tablet, that would be ostension. But the question is, how are these two cases represented by the boy? So the boy is not in the same situation in which we are. It's not particularly in classifying these two types of behavior. In both cases, he gets the information that's really relevant to him, namely where the location of his tablet. He may be aware of that in the first case, in case of ostension, he's being helped by his mother. So it's part of a social relationship. So it has some relevance to a relationship. It may not be what the mother intended particularly to communicate, but it has that extra relevance, so to speak. In the second case, he doesn't get that information unless he possibly might misattribute to her that intention to help her. So I hope this answers your question, Agnieszka. It's
okay. Yes, thank you very much. So I take it that the recognition of basic intention doesn't play a huge role as such in the inference. In these two situations,
yeah.
It for the inferential process, it is not consequential.
It's,
Very good. Okay.
you're quite right. It's you don't have to represent the intention. You may represent. So it's, suppose he may understand that his mother is helpful without representing her intention to help. So representing intention is a kind of rich. It's mentalizing for with meta representation, so to speak. So I seem to be okay. So if that's okay with these questions, we move to further questions. I expect actually more interaction, more feedback. So please,
Robin has her hand up.
Robin is
Could I just follow up a little bit? I mean, I
Sure.
thought this was I thought this was not a very good question on my part, I have to say, but I just realized I had a sort of bit of a confusion at a certain point, and that's why I raised it. I get very bungled up with these informative and communicative intentions, quite honestly. And in your figure 2, where you've got this big diagram of communication and subsets and interacting things and what have you, I wonder then what falls outside, what falls within that big box of communication that doesn't fall within the other little boxes inside it.
It was also one of our reviewers of the article. Well, so the answer is in 2 parts. First, we're not committed to the view that communication is either signaling or ostension and couldn't be anything else. And trying to think of example of what, and then tentatively, let me suggest example of communication which are neither, but we are clearly communication. So let's start with the case of quorum sensing among bacteria, which Tom has written. So bacteria produce chemical signals in the environment. So the others may perceive this chemical, but don't react to it until it reaches a certain density, a certain level. At that point, they all react. So it's a kind of voting, so to speak. If enough of them emit the signal, then you get a reaction which is indeed adapted to, so it's communication, which is adapted to this change in the environment caused by the behavior of others. But so the fact that it's called, the chemical that's emitted is called a signal, but it's not being decoded as such. What's decoded is the rate of, is the concentration of the signal in the liquid environment. So you might want to say, oh, but that's signaling all the same. Then you have to extend a bit the notion of signaling. Now the same thing happens if you take a quorum sensing in bees when they establish a new nest, and very interesting stuff. And again, they vote, so to speak, by gathering in certain places, depending on which place they think would be the best nest. But each individual behavior is not interpreted. What's just interpreted is nothing of voting in humans. Anonymous voting. So as happened a few days ago in the United States and so on. So what is you might say each act of voting, putting one, pressing one key or putting one button in the air and so on, is a signal, but that's not interpreted. What's interpreted is a number, the proportions of the, and again, so you could say, oh, but that's signaling, but certainly not signaling under the standard definition. So one way to think of it is you extend the notion of signal. We always say, no, it's communication, which uses a signal, but not for the standard coding, decoding, signaling process, because the interpretation has a whole different new layer, which doesn't consist in decoding anything. So these are possible examples. And if you are others, by the way, I've been, but nothing in principle that says that's